friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing a 2018 reading wrap-up where I talk about all of the books that I read in 2018, just giving you a little bit of like a rundown of what it's about and how much I liked it, and kind of like a little mini review. Trying to keep it quick because I read like 54 books I think, or 53 books this year, so I'll try to keep it short so this isn't like a 7-hour video. But yeah, so I'm just going to pull out my Goodreads list of read books and go down it and we'll talk. Okay, so excuse me if I kind of don't remember all of the details about some of the books because I read them in January. But the first book that, according to Goodreads, I both started and finished in 2018 was The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. So this book I remember being kind of like, I mean, it's a Neil Gaiman book, so it's like kind of a young adult children's book, and it's about basically this man who's reflecting on his childhood. I don't remember what's the catalyst of that. I don't know if they're like moving or something, but he's reflecting on his childhood and this friend that he had made who lived down the lane, and it turned out that her family are some sort of like witches or magical people. And so he just kind of reflects on all these like adventures that he went on as a child, and it does the classic Neil Gaiman thing where it kind of like it's through a child's eyes, and so it's very like whimsical and magical, and you kind of are left wondering, is this what's really happening, or is this just in the child's mind, or like what is this? But yeah, it was kind of a little bit strange. I was a little jarring to get into it, but it was good. The next book I read is called Needle to Death by Maggie Sefton. It is number 2 in the series of knitting mysteries. There are several more of these books in this list. I'm gonna mention them when they come up, but basically they are just whodunit mysteries about it's a woman who lives in this like really small town, and there's a knitting store across the street that she learns to knit at, and she makes friends with there, and so all of the mysteries are like someone she knows via that club, or they are killed in some way that like has to do with knitting or yarn or something like that. They were good to start with, but one of those series that has like 1,000 books in it, and I kind of got really tired of it, and like it's one of those things where it's like you read it one off and it's like, oh, that was kind of a cute, charming little book, but then you read like the 7th one and it's the exact same as the first book, and you're like, okay, I can't anymore. The next book I read is A Stolen Life, which is by J.C. Lee Duggard. This is a memoir about a girl who was abducted when she was 11 and kept in captivity for, I believe it was 18 years, so well into her adulthood, and it's basically just her talking about what it was like what kind of a bit about what her life was before, what her life was living there, how she got out, all that kind of stuff. I'm really fascinated by the story of J.C. Lee Duggard just because of who she is now and like what she went through. So this is like the 3rd book or something that I've read that is about her life. But yeah, it was really good. It was very clearly her first book. Like she's not total amazing ace author, but you don't really expect her. The next book I read is The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. First of all, I love Ruth Ware. She's a really great author. If you like thriller, like kind of mystery, you know, twisting and turning stories, I really recommend her. So The Woman in Cabin 10, she goes on a cruise as a media personality, like a journalist, covering the launch of this beautiful big ship, and the first night that she's there, she hears a splash coming from outside in the middle of the night, and she thinks it's a body being thrown overboard, and so she, you know, tries to inform people about what happened. But it turns out there was no one ever booked into Cabin 10, and like, well, she saw someone go into that room or whatever. So it's like all this trying to figure out like what is truly going on. So really good book. The next one is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. This book is amazing. It's about a girl. It's kind of hard to explain to people because a lot of the joy of the book comes from like the twist at like the beginning. So there's not really a lot of context you could give, but basically it's about But yeah, it was a really good book. I highly recommend it. The next one is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling. That must have been the end of Nick and I's reread of the whole series. We started when we were going when we were going to Orlando in February 2 years ago. We started reading it. I started reading it out loud to him in the car. So I guess that was probably the finishing up of that. I don't think I need to tell you. I don't think I need to tell you that I like Harry Potter. I think, you know, we're good. The next is Welcome to Night Vale by Joseph Fink, who I'm assuming is the writer for the podcast as well. I used to listen to the podcast a lot with Nick. We thought it was pretty funny. The book was like too much. Like the podcast is like a perfect amount of like bizarre weirdness and then moving on. But the book is a whole novel of like that bizarre weirdness, and it just becomes a lot to like swallow and be like, you're gonna get a little tired of it. It's like, oh, what's the next like weird quirk that's gonna come up that's like not necessarily irrelevant, but we're gonna talk about it for an hour. So I didn't really like it. I think I gave it 2 stars. But if you really like Night Vale and you really like the tone, then it's right on brand. The next I read was The Sword and the Stone by T.H. White. This one I read and I didn't expect it to be what I thought, like, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be the whole story of The Sword and the Stone and like King Arthur and all that stuff. The book ends right before the actual Sword and the Stone happened. So it's like about his childhood and like growing up and like having Merlin as a teacher and, you know, being the son of a king and, or not a king, like a, I don't remember what it is, like an earl or some random stupid title. But yeah, it was good. I've been looking into getting the next one in the series to see how I like that, but yeah. The next one is The Wanderers by Meg Harry. This one, I didn't like it at all either. It was recommended to me by a couple different people, but I just didn't like it. So in this book, it's basically all about how Earth is going to hell, so we need to send people to Mars to terraform it. And so they are preparing to send 3 people to Mars to kind of like set the foundation. And before they do that, they decide to do kind of like a dry run where they do a simulation of the trip and see if those 3 people can live together for that long, live with themselves for that long, and just kind of like how they handle different problems. And then it kind of turns into this weird like question of, you know, are we really being told everything that's going on? Like, what's actually happening? But it has a very unsatisfying ending as far as I'm concerned. I walked away being like, okay, and? So if you like books that have a very clear-cut ending and, you know, you walk away knowing what's happening to all the characters, then this is not a book for you. The next book that I read is The Alchemist, The Secrets of the Immortal Nicholas Flamel. This book, by Michael Scott, sorry. This book is, I really enjoyed it. It's very young adult, like actually young adult. It's basically a alternate history story where Nicholas Flamel was real. I think he was real, but he was really immortal. He really, you know, created the elixir of life and survived all these millennia. And there's actually this whole like other world that we don't notice of like gods and elder gods and magicians and alchemists and all this stuff that's going on. And this dark force wants to get the Philosopher's Stone, or not necessarily the Philosopher's Stone, but the book that he got the recipe for the Philosopher's Stone out of. They want that book to do evil shit. So it's all about him trying to like keep it protected and getting it back when he loses it and all this stuff. It's a series, I quite like it. It's nothing to write home about, really. It's not like groundbreaking storytelling or anything like that, but I really enjoy the characters and I really enjoy the alternate history kind of aspect. So I would recommend, but don't be ready to not take it too seriously. The next is King of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I actually forgot I read this year. This book is just about a guy. It's like he runs a bar and he's telling his life story, and it's all about him growing up and then him wanting to be a magician but him being too poor, and so him going to the magic school and trying anyways, and kind of his adventures in the school. But it was also kind of an interesting narrative. I don't have any plans to read the rest of the series, so take that as you will. The next book that I read is The Droughtlanders by Carrie Mack. This is the book that I just randomly picked up at Value Village. It's basically again, post-apocalyptic kind of world where there's two different types of land in the world. There's the Keys and there's the Droughtlands. And so Keylanders, people who live in the actual nice, still livable places that have houses and water and all this stuff, like they're basically the privileged elite. And then there's Droughtlanders who live like a terrible, horrible life out in the drought, and they're diseased and they're disgusting, like, you know, we don't touch them basically. So this book was pretty good. Again, it was a very young adult novel. Nothing to write home about, no groundbreaking narrative changes. I was looking into reading the next series, but they don't have it in my library and I'm not fussed to download it or anything, so. The next book that I read is The Dark Garden by Margaret Buffy. This is just a book that actually we got from a pile of books that Nick's mom gave us that he had and his sister had when they were kids. So it's quite an old book and it's kind of it's definitely a very young book. I think I was just kind of like between books, or, you know, I finished one book really late at night and I wanted to start another one, but I couldn't like go to the library at that point, so I just started it. Basically it's just about this girl who has some sort of amnesic problem, and as she is trying to get her memories back, she ends up getting back the memories of someone who lived in the same house in the past, or in the garden. And so it then becomes kind of sort of like a time traveling mystery where she's trying to figure out kind of like how to give closure to the spirit, I guess, of the person that she's having the memories of. Again, I don't really remember much about it except for that I just had to look at the Goodreads summary to remember even really that. So the next book that I read is Still Life by Louise Penny. It is a crime novel where there is a murder in a really small town, and so the cops are trying to solve who did it, and they end up coming across like all sorts of different secrets and mysteries within the town, with like the townsfolk. They have problems with each other and all this stuff. I don't even really remember what the ending was, because it was like it's one of those mystery novels that thinks the best way to have a twist ending is to have the twist ending, to have the like solution to the mystery be like most convoluted, crazy, out of the park, like no way you could ever seen it thing. So it definitely does that. It takes you down a couple roads that I'm not a fan of driving down. That being said, I gave it 5 stars, so clearly I liked it. The next is The Magician by Michael Scott, which is next in the series, about Nicholas Flamel. Again, same review as I just gave about the other one. The next I read was Uncommon Types, some short stories by Tom Hanks. This was something that was like sitting up on a shelf in the library, and I was like, Tom Hanks? Like Tom Hanks? And so I picked it up, and it's basically just a series of short stories. I believe that the common thread in all of the stories is that a typewriter plays into the story to some degree. Sometimes it's like the focus of the story, sometimes it's just kind of like there or whatever. But yeah, they were good. It was, I mean, not all of them were amazing and not all of them were bad. It was kind of like, you know, there were some good ones and some bad ones. But anyways, yeah. The next book that I read is The Amber Shadows by Lucy Ribchester. This one I thought I liked, but I rated it 3 stars, so clearly I only kind of liked it. It's a historical novel about World War II, about a camp of women who are are part of the decoding system of Nazi messages. So they interpret or intercept Nazi messages and try to crack the code for the day, and then interpret what the messages are to give them in advance. It's before that the decoder, what's it called? The Enigma machine was like invented, so they had to do it manually. And then it becomes a bit of a personal mystery. I think that's why I didn't like it, is I thought it was going to have to do more with the times. And it becomes a bit more of a mystery about her personal life and about one of the other people at the camp, and it's like a great, I was bummed because it was a really great concept and like a great character and a great time period that I like reading about, and then it just kind of was like. The next book that I read is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. This was a pretty good book. It was about 2 young girls who grew up with, it's a kind of a Buffy the Vampire situation. No, not Buffy. Damn it. That's embarrassing. Sabrina the Teenage Witch situation, where they're young girls who have magical witch aunts who kind of teach them the ways of magicry. So yeah, it's basically about the girls growing up and being adults and having to try to deal with, you know, what their childhood was like, and, you know, they both have run away to different towns, but they're being pulled back for different reasons, and a lot of it is like looking back on their childhood and stories they remember and like people that their aunts help with magic. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. I gave it 4 stars, so not the best thing I ever read, but good. The next book that I read is Heir to the Empire, which is by Timothy Zahn. Basically, this is a Star Wars novel that takes place 5 years after the Death Star was destroyed. Basically, the Rebel Alliance is trying to pick off the last people who are fighting the war and like clean up the Empire and put together a new regime kind of situation. So it's all about that, and then there's like a subplot about this new like enemy that they're trying to deal with. I don't really remember much about it. It's kind of just like, I mean, Star Wars, there's Star Warsy things that happen. I do remember it being quite a good read. I kind of sped through it, so. So the next book is extremely depressing. It's called My Heart and Other Black Holes, Jasmine Warga. It is about a young girl who is about 16 years old, I believe, and she just really wants to kill herself. And so she plans it all the time. She thinks about it constantly. She just wants to die, but she's too afraid to do it. So she finds this website called Suicide Partners and meets up with this guy who also wants to kill himself but is too afraid to do it alone, and they meet up and they agree to do it together. However, as I'm assuming you can imagine with a YA novel, she and him get along really great, and she ends up kind of like getting new perspectives on life and stuff like that, and so it comes down to whether she wants to go through with it with him still or try to talk him out of the original pact. I rated it 5 stars, but I don't think it was that great. It was kind of like it was really cheesy, and it was really like, we have this huge insurmountable problem. Oh, it's fixed. Next book I read is The Old Man's War by John Scalzi. This book I really enjoyed. It's basically, it's kind of a classic, so you might have heard of it. It's a book about in the future where there is space travel is like a normal thing, and their military branch that is fighting in space instead of recruiting young people, they recruit at like 65, I think, you can decide to go and join the the war, and they take you and they completely genetically, physically, surgically change your whole body from being a body of a 65-year-old to being basically just like a war machine, and then you go to space and you fight. But yeah, I thought it was really good. It was really interesting. The characters were really good. The next book that I read is Down Among the Sticks and Bones, which is actually number 2 in the Weirworld Children series by Shauna McGuire. This series is great, by the way. I highly recommend it. The reason why I read number 2 first is because number 2 actually happens chronologically first. It just came out second, so I read it first and it doesn't really affect anything. But yeah, basically it's about this world where some children are, when they get curious or they want to explore an unknown place, like they go, you know, into the woods, or they go into like their parents' basement or their grandparents' attic or whatever, they end up opening a door, and the door leads them to another world. And it can be a magical, wonderful world full of like lollipops and rainbows. Literally, I think one of those exists. Or it's a world where you and your sister are basically Dr. Frankenstein's assistant and a vampire's like consort, which is what this book is about. And so it's all about their kind of like adventures in this new world and like how they deal with it. And you know, I think one of them wants to go back and the other one doesn't, and so it's like whether they're going to be able to go back or if their door is closed. And so it is really good. I think actually it makes more sense to read at first, but the world building is so good in this series that it doesn't really matter at all. The next book that I read is Secret Path by Gord Downie. He is a musician that passed away a couple years ago now. A Canadian musician, really like popular in Canada. And he wrote this book about a young Aboriginal boy who was living at a residential school, and he decided to escape and run away because he wanted to go back and find his family, but instead he froze to death in the Canadian winter wilderness. So real cheery, good topic, but it's a really good, it actually has an accompanying album that each page has an accompanying song that you listen to while you like look at it. Or at least every couple pages. So it's like it's an experience for sure. I definitely recommend it. The album is on Spotify. The next one I read is A Killer Stitch, which is part of that stupid knitting series. The next book that I read is Zodiac by Robert Graysmith. It's basically a kind of tell-all about the Zodiac killer and him trying to kind of covering, you know, what the crimes were, how law enforcement at the time dealt with it, what are the current theories, and then what is his personal theory. It was fine. It was interesting. A lot of it was things I already knew from like there's very little new information given. And it's one of those things where it's like he says at the end of the book, he basically says with 100% certainty that that this person who's part of his theory is the Zodiac killer. And it's like, A, that's a lot to accuse someone of. Like murdering, like, I don't know, a lot of people. And B, it doesn't really matter in the end because they're not going to reopen the case because of some random author. They're not going to arrest this guy because of some random author. I don't know, I felt like the book was too geared towards like proving his theory when it's like, does that actually matter? The next book I read was Red Plenty, Inside the 50s Soviet Dream by Frances. Didn't like this book. It was kind of just over my head. It's basically what it says. It's all about communism in Soviet Russia. Or Soviet USSR, I guess, throughout history basically, kind of like its rise and fall almost. There was just too much that I didn't understand, like too much context that I think the author kind of assumed, and maybe rightly so, maybe I'm just like clueless about history, but assumed that you knew ahead of time. So if you're not already like pretty well versed on the history of Russia / USSR, it could be a tough read for you. The next book is Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire. It is actually the first one in the series of the Weirworld Children, and so it is all about a school for wayward children, where basically because these children go through these like crazy wild experiences, they come back talking about these magical amazing things that can't possibly be happening, and saying like, you know, oh, I was gone for 3 months but I was actually like in, you know, this magical land. And the parents are like, okay, what? And then as they get older, like I think you can go to the school at like 14, it's like a high school. At that age, the parents are like, okay, you have to stop. Like, obviously, that's not what happened. Like, that's not real. Like, you're just delusional or whatever. And so this school offers, like, therapy. Well, it offers therapy, but really it's just about the woman who runs it was, as a child, she went to one of these doorways, and so she kind of started the school to help kids that are just deeply misunderstood, but are told that they're liars or they're crazy or they're delusional or whatever, to come and have other people who have gone through doors. So yeah, I love this series. It's so good. I highly recommend it. The The next book is Dire Consequences, which is just another stupid knitting book. Next book is Undead Girl Gang, which was a book about a teenage girl whose best friend has just passed away, and so she is Wiccan, and she decides to use a spell to try to bring her friend back to life. Hijinks ensue. It was a really good book. I really loved the characters. They were like really like spunky, quirky young women who were just really interesting to read about, so I definitely recommend that one. Next book was On the Outside Looking Indian, which is by Rubendir Gill. Basically just a memoir slash experiment written down kind of thing, where this girl, she grew up in Canada, but she grew up with two immigrant parents from India who were very traditional, very un-Americanized kind of situation, and so she realizes when she grows up that there was a lot of things that were like totally normal in other children's lives that she never got to experience, like going to Disney World and, God, I can't remember, having a sleepover, like really things like that that you just take for granted. And so she, as an adult, decides to go on this adventure and try to do all the things that she couldn't do when she was a kid. So she like joins the softball team, and like she takes lessons that she wasn't allowed to take because she, you know, her parents wouldn't let her, or they couldn't afford it. And so it's quite funny. It's definitely an interesting perspective on Canadian like culture and, you know, what it's like to be someone who grows up in a non-Americanized home and trying to like grapple with, you know, loving your parents and loving, you know, parts of your culture, but also wanting to like fit in as a kid. Like, especially as a kid, you don't know any better, you just want to fit in. But yeah, it was really good. The next book I read is The Final Six by Alexandra Monier. But basically this book is about where Earth is basically kaput, and actually there was a huge series of like natural disasters that happened that basically puts the world into like evacuation mode. And so they're trying to pick a group of 6 people to send to space to create some place that humanity can go to, basically. And the way they do this is they pick 100 or 50 people, one from like every country or something along those lines. Yeah, they're going to Europa, Jupiter's moon, to try to make it livable. But they pick kids from all over the world who have some sort of like unique skill or ability that they will be able to bring to the table. So there's engineers, there's athletes, there's scientists, and so they have to come to a space camp and they have to compete to become the final 6, which are going to be the 6 people who get sent into space ultimately. And the book centers around 2 characters, Leo and Naomi, and they kind of both have their own stories where like reasons why they want to be there, why they don't want to be there. And yeah, it was a really cute little love story. I quite liked it. It's a little bit tropey, but what can you expect? The next is Where I Live by Brenda Ruffiner. This one was pretty good. It's basically about a teenage girl who is actually homeless. Her parents both passed away, and she is basically trying to hide it from her friends and the school so she doesn't get put in like the system or anything. And so it's all about her trying to survive without being basically caught. You kind of just go through a couple months of her life, her trying to deal with that and the kind of like repercussions and hiccups in that adventure. It was pretty good. I don't have any complaints about it. The next is Beneath the Sugar Sky, which is again from the Wayward Children series. Great series. This one is about... I don't know how much more praises I can sing for the series. It's good. Characters amazing. World building terrific. Character development spot on. Love it. The next is Beware the Kitten Holy, which is a Lumberjanes comic, or it's graphic novel, and it's listed on Goodreads as by Noelle Stevenson, but also involved are Grace Ellis and Faith Hicks. So this is volume 1 of a series. I'm not gonna really review each one individually because they're all pretty equal in my mind. But basically it's about these 5 girls who are spending the summer at a summer camp, and basically the kind of wacky adventures that they get set on, mysteries that they end up trying to solve, and there's kind of a, you know, a mysterious element of like magic or, you know, something a bit beyond them that's going on. It is really good. It is very good. The characters are amazing. It shows female friendship in like such an accurate and like good way where it's not like really superficial or anything like that. Like they're really good friends with each other. And yeah, I really highly recommend those graphic novels. I think they came in comics and I read the graphic novel. The next is The Death of Mrs. Westaway, which is by Ruth Ware again. She is an amazing author. This book is about a woman who receives a letter saying that her grandmother or great-grandmother has passed away, and she has been given a inheritance of some description, and so she has to go and pick up that inheritance. The trick is that she is not the same person. She does not have a great-grandmother, and so this was given to her in error. And so basically the book is a lot about her, because she's like very, very poor basically, and she owes a lot of money to a lot of people, and so she's thinking that she should do it. And so she ends up going. There ends up being a bit of a mystery, not only just with her, but with, you know, the whole family that she's getting involved with, and like the history of them, and why the grandmother left the stuff in the way that she did. But yeah, it's really good. Again, it's very twisty turny. You never really know what's gonna happen. It's a little bit more convoluted than some of her other stuff, but I really enjoyed it still. I didn't find it too confusing. Like, I remember what the solution is. Next was the next 3 volumes of Lumberjane. We have Out of Time, A Terrible Plan, and Friendship to the Max. Really great comic. Oh, and Band Together, which is the 5th one. I'm just gonna read this one because it's a really long title. It's Breaking Free, How I Escaped My Father, Warren Jeffs, Polygamy, and the FLDS Cult by Rachel Jeff. This is about, if you're familiar with like cults in American history, this is the FLDS cult. So the followers of the Latter-day Saints, I think. They're kind of an offshoot of Mormonism that continues to practice polygamy, like, you know, fervently. So it's fully a cult where there's like no rights for women. They are basically owners. Their property to their husbands, and even the husbands have to report everything that they do and take every direction, like who they're going to marry, what they're going to do, how many kids they're going to have, when they're going to have those kids, what those kids are going to do, who they're going to marry, from the prophet, who is kind of supposed to be God's existence on this planet. So they turn to him, and he like hears messages from God and everything. So basically this is a memoir about one of the girls who is actually a daughter of Warren Jeffs, who is the son of the original prophet, and basically just her trying to, it's a lot about her life in the cult, and then a lot about her trying to escape it afterwards. I kind of got into reading about the FLDS cult for a while. I think there's at least one more book I read about it coming up. But yeah, it was a really great book if you were interested in cults or kind of like true crime like that. It's a really good insight into what it was like. Next is The Secret History of Wonder Woman by Jill Lepore. This one is pretty straightforward. It's just the history of Wonder Woman, all about how her creator was this guy who basically was polygamous, which is kind of ironic considering what I was just talking about, and was like all about free love and like open, you know, living and open families and like all this weird stuff. Not weird stuff, I'm not judging, but like weird stuff is that I don't even remember what it was. Because it was so different. But yeah, and all about like where the origins of Wonder Woman came from, and like how she's changed over the years. I love Wonder Woman. She's amazing, so it was a really good read. Next 2 books are a series, Daughter of the Pirate King and Daughter of the Siren Queen. This book is basically about a young woman pirate who is the, you guessed it, daughter of the Pirate King. And basically she is part siren, and so she has the ability to put men to sleep and have them do what she wants them to do, but she still has like 2 legs and she walks on land. The main plot is that they're trying to find this, there's like a key to, or a map to a like ultimate treasure, and there's 4 pieces of it, or 4 or 5 pieces of it, and they're trying to find all the pieces. It was like scattered between like the different pirate kings, and so that's what the story is about, but there's like a whole bunch of other different like plots happening. It was really, really good actually. I was really surprised by how much I liked it. I got the first one and I immediately went back and got the second one from the library. So the next is Olivia Twist by Lori Langdon. It's a retelling of Oliver Twist but with a girl. It was good. The next is The Sorceress, which is part of the Nicholas Flamel series I've been talking about. Next one is called Beat Depression Fast, 10 Easy Steps Proven to Make You Happier, some crap, by Alexander Massey. I did not finish this book. I don't even know why I started it. It was basically like, think positive. Yeah. So yeah. Then I read a really great self-help book, which was called Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. It's by Kristen Neff, and it's a really good book. I honestly like still use the techniques in that book to this day to help with my depression and anxiety. It's basically a lot about treating yourself more fairly and kind of more how you would want others to treat you. Because we can be so hard on ourselves and so mean and say all these things in our head to ourselves, but it's like, we would never take that if someone else said it to us, or we would never say it, and we would never say it to anyone else because it's just so mean. So why are we so mean to ourselves? But yeah, it's a really, really, really great book. I highly recommend it to anyone who kind of wants to work on themselves, and especially if you have like depression or anxiety, it's very helpful. Okay, we're getting to the end of it. So the next is Sorcerer to the Crown, and it is by Zen Cho. It is a book where I guess it's technically kind of an alternate history because a lot of the geography and stuff like that is historically accurate. But basically magic is real, it's a thing. But all of the magical power comes from fairy world or fairyland or something like that. And so they just harness it. Thaumaturgists can harness it and use it in everyday life. But suddenly all the magic has stopped. So they're like running out of it. And so this man who is a black man who was just recently basically made the Sorcerer Royal, who is like in charge of all of the sorcerers and the schools of sorcery, and basically reports straight to the king about like sorcery stuffs. And people are pissed that he's black. So there's that plot, and then there's the plot with the magic, and then there's also another character who's a female who's living at a school for female magic users, that basically tries to beat the magic out of them because they don't believe that women have the constitution to deal with doing magic. And so she tries to kind of like break free and learn more about her past because she was dropped off at there as an orphan. And so yeah, there's a lot going on. It's also really hard to read because it's in like old kind of styled English. I found it really kind of hard to like keep track of what was going on and like want to keep reading. Like I wanted to keep reading because I liked the story, but it was just like hard. So to keep that in mind, but it was a good story. Next I read Emotional First Aid, which is by Guy Winch, or Guy Winch? Anyways, it's actually, it probably wasn't for me really, because it's more for people who don't deal with like full anxiety or depression, but you know, are having trouble coping with something or dealing with something or whatever. It kind of just gives you like, the way he talks about it is that, you know, we go to therapists and we go to psychiatric help, to get psychiatric help when we have, you know, these major mental illnesses, but what happens when you just need a little bit of first aid, kind of like instead of needing to go to a heart surgeon, you just kind of, you know, you just need a bandage. And so this is kind of like a guide on how to give yourself emotional first aid. The next book I'm going to read again because it has a giant title. The Witness Wore Red, the 19th Wife Who Brought Polygamous Cult Leaders to Justice, by Rebecca Musser. She is another woman who was part of the FLDS cult. Again, it's a memoir all about her life there, what it was like to be there, and what happened afterwards. So yeah, it's a really interesting book. Next I read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I had watched A Muppet Christmas Carol and I love that movie, and so I decided to read the original book because I never had before. Two things that really surprised me: how short it was and how freaking accurate the Muppet Christmas Carol is to it. Like, it is like very accurate, minus the Muppets. You know, the minor detail, but like as far as like characters and like what they say, like the dialogue is so similar, and like it's very, very similar. I was very surprised. And there you go. That is apparently the last book that I read in 2018. I really need to stop doing year-long wrap-ups. I should probably do them monthly if I want to keep doing this, because this video is going to be a video and a half. It's going to be a movie. So if you're still watching, cheers. Thank you for sticking with me this whole time. Give it a thumbs up and let me know what kind of reading and booky videos you would like me to do in the future. And yeah. So until the next video, later days.